So this session is on the very esoteric issue of American Bentwood boxes. So what are American Bentwood boxes? So when we think about them, probably what you see in your mind will be something like this. This is a very popular Pennsylvania German bride's box. These are very common in the 19th century. There's a few in the 18th century, and they're called brides or bandboxes. And they're generally were used to store small household articles. They've got a hardwood side that's been either steamed or soaked, and then they're bent to shape. And they have softwood tops and bottoms, and they're glued together. So this is the one in the picture is a really nice example of one dating to the mid 19th century or so from southern Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Now, when you think about Native American bentwood boxes, probably this is what you will see, or if you Google it, this is what you'll find on the internet. The most famous of these are the so-called Northwest Coast kerf boxes. They're made out of cedar, and they're also steamed and then bent to shape after being carved, then they're painted with polychrome designs. And if you notice the one on the right-hand side, it has little mother of pearl shell inlays on it. So these are probably the most common or the most well-known native bent boxes. But there are a few back in this neck of the woods. They're very similar to that Pennsylvania German bride box I showed you just a few minutes ago. Oval shape with decorated sides and softwood top and bottom. And usually they're from Nova Scotia. There's a very few in Maine made out of ash with white pine tops and bottom. In the antiques trade, they're usually called Micmac Bride Boxes, and because of the similarity. And so this is a good example from the Hudson Museum over in Maine. So what I want to do is talk about a little adventure in finding and authenticating an American Indigenous Bentwood box. So the adventure begins long ago in 1999. My wife Anna and me antiquing in southern Quebec, and we have a few of our favorite antique shops. One of the most important of these, and if you ever get a chance to be driving from Vermont or New England up to Quebec City on Route 20, I suggest you stop at St. Eulalie, Quebec, at Michel Prince Antiquité. Huge warehouse, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. This is a promotional picture that they use online. And they had a interesting box up on a shelf, and I took it out, looked at it, and it was a fascinating piece. And Michel Prince, the owner himself, came over to me and he told me a little story about it. So this begins the mystery of the St. Eulalie box. So the first element of it, and this is a photograph of the side of it here, is Michael Prince told me this box is autochtone. That's a way of saying indigenous or Native American up in Quebec. And he was able to tell me it came from Poton or Poton, don't know how to pronounce it, Quebec, a place that I'd never heard of. I noticed that it was sewn. In this case, it was, I thought it was sewn with spruce root at first, but when I looked at it carefully, it was laced up with splint. So that was interesting. So on a whim, I bought it because Michael Prince knows everything about Quebec native materials. And so I brought it home and just sat it on the shelf for a while. Now, the point is there's many other types of your American style bentwood boxes. They're often called pantry boxes, and they're often oval, and some of them have complex carving on the top. You can see the example in the photograph on the lower left there, one that's very deeply chip carved in geometrics, or some of them almost have a shaker-like feel. with the kind of complex overlap and the sewing down on it that you can see on the one on the right that actually was found in Odenac up in Quebec. So there's a chance that these little study boxes may be native, or some of them are, but unfortunately, there's not any literature about it. And so that was the minute. That's the mystery. And so if you look at the top of it, this is a big white pine chunk that the top is made from. But if you look a little carefully, here and there, there's these kind of light scroll or step designs. There seems to have the remains of a design on it. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. Then if you open it up, you can look and you can see it as the wood splint sewing, the ashwood sides. And in this case, the side had become loose from the bottom. So I pushed it up a little bit. So you can actually see in this photograph the ends of the pegs, the wooden pegs, about a little bit larger than a wooden toothpick that were driven into the sides to hold it together. So this gives you a little bit of detail about its construction. Now we go back to, of course, the famous detective's notebook. And so there are some subtle signs or forms of evidence that this points to a native production. The first thing is they didn't use ripsaws, precision draw shaves, or convex bladed planes until the 20th century. So they split the wood with mauls and wooden wedges. And there's a bit of evidence of that. But also some pioneer New Englanders split the wood to make rough lumber. And so, we have to look at all these little details on it. The Wabanakis, on the other hand, finished the wood, the splint. In other words, they split it off. They surface it with what's called a crooked knife. And the crooked knife has, well, some of them have a hooked blade at the front part of it. That leaves a distinctive ripples of where the wood is gouged out, ripples and grooves in the surface, narrower and shorter. And then the broad, regular marks left by the broad plane. And so these irregular grooves can be felt by running your fingers over it and or holding it against a raking light. So in this picture, you can see this is a Wabanaki crooked knife on the left. And if you notice where that arrow is, that shows that kind of curved part. And the radius of that is about, 3/4 of an inch. So when you use that to shave a piece of wood, you'll notice it's going to leave irregular and small grooves all throughout the surface of the piece of wood. And so if we go back and look at that box, it seems as though there's some marks that are distinctive. So what we have to do is get out our old trusty black body microscope and start investigating the marks. So here's me on the black body microscope, mid-century modern, in a dark academy nook of my house. This is what you look at when you get up close. First of all, you can see there are these kind of dribbles of some kind on the surface of the wood. If you look up to maybe the upper left-hand upper quadrant there, you can see the reflections of the grooves made by the crooked knife. But if you look down more to the center, you can see this kind of 90-degree angle thing. Some of it is broken apart, and if you look carefully in the middle of it, you can see it's kind of reddish. So, if you want to stop your YouTube right now, you can just stop. I don't know whether you can zoom in on it, but you notice that's rust red in there. And so what that indicates, it's some kind of a mineral paint, okay, that actually remains on the surface and protects the surface. That's why it's built up like that. This is really interesting stuff. So if you look at it, this is actually, since you're looking at this on your television or your computer screen, there's a lot more than 20 power magnification. but they're made from iron oxide. And probably it's a form of black hematite paint that will oxidize, of course, to just rust red. So we know that this is actually a paint job that was put on it long, long ago. And also, if you look at it, you notice that the design is a step. In other words, it's got a pair of 90-degree angles on it, and it's a dual line. So this is a very distinctive and very deliberate paint job, even though there's not a whole lot that shows up on it. So, we can write in our notebook now the obscure marks on the Bentwood box that turned out to be the remains of old mineral-based, probably ochre or hematite paint. The next step is to determine if the remains form distinctive patterns. And to use this, we use an ultraviolet lamp, especially on things like the hematite paint and things like this. It reveals information that is not easily seen by the naked eye. Now, speaking of naked eyes, you got to be very, very careful, especially when you set your lamp on shortwave. You do not want that to impinge on your retina. Okay, so be very, very careful if you go and buy one of these things online. Long wave will just give you a bad sunburn on your retina. The shortwave is very dangerous, so I would suggest even not buying one that's got shortwave. Okay, just a little tip here. In this, you can see a lot more detail. So there's that step design of a dual line step. And then in other places, you can barely see those kind of scrolly things. So this is really weird. You got a mix of geometrics and scrolls on it, which is a very distinct kind of signature type of a design that we'll get to a little bit later. Let's just hold that for a second. And, I hope you can see the three of them. The two on the bottom are pretty easy to see into the ultraviolet. The one on the upper right, maybe right at the tip of the arrow. If you see, that's where it kind of starts and then it kind of rolls down from that toward the bottom a little bit and then scrolls up again to make kind of a C that's facing more or less to the upper left. Okay. So it's got some interesting action on it. So bottom line is this is a complex rectilinear. That's just a fancy way of saying a step design. Curvilinear is a fancy way of saying it's got curves on it. Okay. Next thing you have to do is, we've got this box here. It seems to have certain characteristics that are shared with native traditions. It seems to have crooked knives. It seems to have hematite paint on it. A lot of these little bits and pieces of evidence here. Now we got to track down similar examples online or through the help of friends and colleagues that can point them out to us. And we've got to also do a map search to find the provenance of it. Where is Pot in Quebec? So it's time now to pull out the stuff. And I apologize. This is a Dark Academy lecture, and yes, I'm using a computer. It's out of character, but you see, at least I've got books piled up. So here we are checking out Google Maps and doing the literature search. The first thing that's really interesting is that Potton is only a few miles from my house, probably 20 miles, which is absolutely fascinating. It's just north of North Troy, which we do have evidence of Abenaki basket makers being in North Troy and Troy. So there are indigenous people making not necessarily Bentwood boxes, but other things in the region. And I threw a 10-mile diameter provenance, which is often used for analytic purposes to give you kind of maybe a 90% confidence interval about where it came from. Now here's a quote by Ruth Holmes Whitehead and Bruce Bork's book over in Maine. So interesting enough, they were known over there. Containers made of wood were always made by men. An example is the Bentwood box. The sides were formed by a single piece of wood that was steamed, then bent, and treen pegged. Treen just means wood, pegged to a wooden base. Such boxes were decorated with water-soluble paint or mineral pigments, such as ochre. So there we go. Mixed with oil or by burning and incising. Surviving example all date to the late 18th century or later. So there we go. So there's the one good Wabanaki reference that I could find in a very cursory literature search, but that's pretty good. This is an interesting slide here of a probable Abenaki Bentwood box that was forwarded to me by my colleague Vera Sheehan. This is a National Museum of the American Indian collection slide. And it's a very interesting piece because it fits many of the characteristics that Ruth Holmes Whitehead talked about. First of all, it's an ash splint, a great big thick one, or wide one, excuse me. It was pegged with treen, so it fits some of the important characteristics of the native type of a bentwood box. And so in this slide, you can see that its overall appearance is very similar to that of the St. Eulalie box. The question of provenance is important. It's listed on the accession card or the accession database. That's from Pineville, Quebec. I could not find that. Maybe it's an old name of a village that's gone extinct, or it might be a typo from Pierreville. If it is a typo from Pierreville, it probably refers to Odenak. So that's a interesting comparative piece. So this one actually originally was called Wabanaki. It has later been assigned to the Penobscots. So this is really a very interesting puzzle. So I don't think that this analog here is different enough to say that it probably is made by a different hand or a different tradition because it's sewn in a different way. But the design on the top is very, very, very similar. So now on this slide here, we can actually narrow in on the specifics of it. So it is painted with a black paint. And so I would bet you that's a hematite paint job, just like the one that's on ours. You've got the step and scroll design, so we can actually name the design. The interesting and fascinating thing is, according to the museum accession, and I can't see it on this slide, it's dated to 1779 on it. So in other words, we're right up against the 1780 to 1970 time period of our study, trying to figure out what happened in the American Abenaki area between that date. So, we missed it by a year, but I think we can include that. Or we can just say, oh yeah, that's a little bit later one. It was made in 1781. So that makes it okay. All right. So here's the analysis summary of our Dark Academy investigation. The St. Eulalie box was found in American Abenaki territory. No question of that. Now, the surface revealed evidence of being shaped with a crooked knife because of the arc of the cuts that were made. If you're going to use a draw shave or something like that, or especially a arcutate bladed plane, they're going to have a much wider, maybe a 2-inch arc to them. So this is a crooked knife. It's an indigenous invention. Macroscopic analysis reveals it's painted with a black, and since it rusted, it was a hematite paint. Ultraviolet light revealed the remains of dual line step design, as well as the ends of larger scroll designs. The painted design closely matched a Wabanaki box over the Maine State Museum collection. The main box sides were laced with wire, so the St. Eulalie box was done with splints that indicate some measure of technical and maybe geographic separation. The conclusion to our mystery of the Bentwood box. The St. Eulalie box was made with indigenous tools, was decorated with distinctly 18th century Wabanaki designs, but is slightly different in construction from the Maine example. The forensic evidence is in. It is consistent with an American Abenaki origin. And there is the now newly corrected provenance and dating information on the box. And so now we can take this and create a story. And this is the important thing, that once you get all of this information, you can create a narrative now that will help establish a independent design and artistic tradition in another area. So we can read this. In the waning years of the 18th century, an American Abenaki man crafted bentwood boxes for his family, indigenous friends, or to trade to his European neighbors. He first steamed and bent two thin pieces of fresh cut ashwood into ovals, a wide one for the body and a thin but slightly larger one for the lid. He laced the overlapping ends together with thin strips of wet, flexible wood splint lacings. The ovals were traced onto a plank of white pine that had been split from a log and then surface level with a crooked knife. The two pine wood ovals were cut and pegged to the sides. The box was given a brownish stain. Finally, Wabanaki step and scroll designs were painted onto the lid with hematite paint. The finished bentwood box then was carefully and respectfully used for 200 years before it was found in an old farmhouse in Potton, Quebec, by an antique dealer, after which it became an important piece of ancestral American Abenaki art. And there's the end of the story. Thank you very much.